Twice in recent American elections, the candidate who became president did so despite having fewer total votes than their opponent. Is it time to revisit the Electoral College, or is it hands off a unique component of the American political structure? And for years, Detroit homeowners found themselves overtaxed on their properties by some $600 million. This week, it turned into a lawsuit against Detroit and Wayne County. Today is Sunday, February 16th, 2020, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. We come to you after another very busy news week. Everything from the expanding worries over the coronavirus to another rough and tumble week in Washington. But there was one story that may have escaped your notice this past week, and it's one that lays the groundwork for our continuing conversations on whether we can make American elections better. Last week, the Virginia House passed a bill that would award Virginia's electoral votes in a presidential election to the presidential candidate who wins the popular vote across the country. In other words, say Virginians voted for candidate A, but candidate B wins the popular vote. Well, Virginia's 13 electoral votes would go to candidate B. Why would they vote to do that? Well, if the Virginia Senate agrees, Virginia would become the 16th state to sign up for what's known as the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. So far, 15 states and the District of Columbia have signed on to what is basically an end around on the Electoral College. Now, getting rid of the American Electoral College would be a very complex ordeal, but states do have the right to decide how they want their electoral votes awarded. And the states now part of the compact apparently agree with the 65% of Americans overall who feel the popular vote winner should be the one to become president. But wouldn't that strip more sparsely populated states of any kind of influence in an election? This morning, we're going to dig into the Electoral College. Should it stay or should it go? Also this week, a lawsuit was filed against Detroit and Wayne County as part of the massive overtaxation of Detroit homeowners. Last month, the Detroit News detailed the problem added up to more than $500 million in inflated tax assessments. A lot of people lost their homes over it. The lawsuit claims that compounding that problem was a very late notice to homeowners that gave them too little time to appeal the assessments. We'll dig into the case all today on Flashpoint. Well, throughout the impeachment process, we heard the president and his supporters argue that Democrats were trying to overturn the will of 63 million voters. Well, then again, the Electoral College tabulation meant going against the will of 66 million voters who preferred Hillary Clinton. It happened in 2000 as well, when Al Gore got 500,000 more votes than George W. Bush. Several candidates have talked about getting rid of the Electoral College, and as I mentioned, Virginia could be the latest entry into what is known as the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. A few weeks ago, we talked about changes that could perhaps improve the American electoral system. Let's talk today about the biggest fish in that pond, the Electoral College. And here to talk about it, Stephen Henderson back with us from Detroit Today at WDET. Vince Keenan heads up major projects for the neighborhoods in the city of Detroit, but longtime Flashpoint viewers will recall he's the founder of Publius, which was dedicated to voter education. Sandy Barua, head of the Detroit Regional Chamber. In fact, their report on elections was our starting point last time around. And Nolan Finley, editorial page editor of the Detroit News. Vince, let me start with you. I think a lot of people believe and understand that the Electoral College is to protect smaller populous states, which would get no attention from candidates if all they had to really do was spend their time in places like California, Texas, Florida, New York.
So I don't think they get very much attention. Plus, you start with the premise that a lot of people understand the Electoral College. I'm not sure anyone really understands the Electoral College. Its fundamental purpose at the time that it was created was really fear of trying to get consensus out of a brand new country that was divided into slave states and non-slave states, and also had decided to not allow women to vote. So there's huge chunks of a population with these very high ideals, and the idea of going with a full popular vote was kind of complicated.
And didn't know how to count all of the slaves as citizens or part of the population in
Failed
the
on
states.
that front for a long time.
So is it time then, Stephen, for it to go because it's such a relic, or does it still hold relevance to us?
It serves no useful purpose, and you go back to the history and its connection to inequality, which Vince pointed out, which is, I think, a moral reason not to embrace it. But there's also some ideas that we've come up with in the intervening 240 some years that contravene the electoral college. I mean, the concept of one person, one vote, which powers our thinking of balloting in this country, runs right in the face of the idea of big states with lots of land but few people having more say over the process than lots of people, and so that's another reason to get rid of it. The other thing that's true is that, I mean, as Vince points out, the Republic was really different when this was thought up, and one of the things they were trying to do was leaven a lot of structural differences in the way that states were holding balloting and counting votes in order to make sure that it came out with a national kind of a consensus. That's not true anymore. I mean, voting is standardized in this country in a way that it wasn't then. So it doesn't make sense.
Sandy, my hunch is that this argument would get a lot further in America if the two examples that I could point to didn't involve Democrats who had received the more of the popular vote, but Republicans who ended up winning. So you're not going to get a whole lot of buy-in from red states on this, are we?
Yeah, so a couple things. So first of all, I think there is strong evidence that the Electoral College was created not by our founding fathers, but by the aliens that landed at Roswell and or the ghosts of the Byzantine Empire, because the more you learn about it, the more you scratch your head. But secondly, be careful what you ask for. Now, right now, at this moment, in fact, this referendum that you referred to, that Virginia, right now it's only blue states that are supporting it because our recent history is
Mostly blue states.
Yeah, well,
Virginia is kind of in the middle somewhere.
Well, right.
Colorado.
It is the blue part of the Virginia legislature that has approved this, right?
Yes.
So now let's go back to 2004, when my boss at the time, George Bush, was running against John Kerry. A flip of 50,000 votes in Ohio would have had the opposite result. George Bush had a 4 million lead in the vote count, but he would have lost the Electoral College, and John Kerry would have been. So it can easily work.
Oh, sure,
it can easily work the other way. But you're right. This particular initiative looks very much like a blue initiative. And the last thing I'd say is be careful what you ask for. I mean, even though the Electoral College was built by the aliens that landed at Roswell, be careful what you ask for, because while our system now is far from perfect, the alternatives are far from perfect either. So be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, this actually started out as a Republican movement. The guy who's championing it here and elsewhere, Saul Anousis, the former Republican Party chair here, and they did it for the reason you might expect. They looked at the Electoral College, and with California, New York, and the other heavily populated Democratic states, they recognized the Democrats start almost at the finish line when the balloting starts. And this national popular vote idea was aimed at assuring that Republican voters in places like California and New York actually had their vote counted, meant something on Election Day.
The idea that smaller state, clearly, I think we're all concerned that Iowa and places like Iowa and New Hampshire get outsized attention early on. I think they're concerned that they would get no attention at all if we changed it.
I'm not sure that's true, because right now, it's like a dozen states, 10, 12 states get 80, 90% of the election campaigning. And a big state like California, what's the point of going? You know which way it's going to go. They don't get a whole lot of attention. New York doesn't get a whole lot of attention. But there are some smaller states, Nevada, for example, gets a lot of attention. So I think it forces a nationwide campaign.
But the battleground states do change over a relatively short period of time.
Right.
We're sitting in one.
1988, not that long ago, Oregon, bright blue, neon blue Oregon, was a battleground state, and George H.W. Bush almost won it over Dukakis. So things change.
Vince, at the very least, would it make more sense if we only have 2 states right now that allocate their electoral votes, Nebraska and Maine? Everybody else, it's winner take all. Would it at least make more sense if we would divide? By the way, if we would have done that in 2016, Donald Trump's margin of victory would have been even larger, which is an interesting thing to note. But should it have been?
So there's the winner take all tweak actually is one. So getting back to, I think, Sandy's point of sort of be careful what you wish for, that's always a good thing to think about when you're going into any kind of electoral reform, right? We wield the most powerful vote that any human beings have ever wielded. Like the vote
American
cast by an
voters.
American voter is the most important vote and most powerful vote anyone has ever cast. That being said, for 200 and some odd years, we've been sort of tweaking this particular one. And in the 1800s, we went to winner take all, which essentially created the system that we have today. There are all kinds of ways that we could tweak this, but I think what's fundamentally important is that the public, the general public, and the American voter believes that they are electing the president. And the concept that this other sort of arcane, Roswellian model is actually the thing that decides it. It results in a kind of a technicality conversation at the end of every election that it comes up. It is not healthy for the democratic system, and it doesn't affirm the sense that people have that these votes are important, and it's important to cast them, and it's important to get your voice heard. So I think we could tweak it. I think we've taken enough time to figure out how to do it, and I think it'd be okay.
The last poll that I saw, 65% of Americans believe that the popular vote winner should get it. Although it's interesting, if you took that same poll on an electoral basis, maybe it would certainly be closer, right?
It would look different.
Yeah. So what do we do?
Well, I mean, I think, again, this is an anachronism, and we have had anachronisms in the history of the Republic before, and we get rid of them, right? We change because the culture has changed, because the law has changed, because the way we see each other has changed.
Well, this one, though, should we change the fact that we're a republic made up of states? This would make us much more of a collective.
It would.
Rather than this 50-state republic, including
no question.
And the District of Columbia.
Yeah, no question. I mean, and that's one of the anachronisms. I mean, that republic of states meant something very different when this notion came about than it does now. The difference among states today is nowhere near as dramatic or important as it was then, at least in terms of the structure of voting. And think of it this way: if there were another country that we were helping to become a democracy, came up to us and said, hey, we've got a way to make sure that the loser can actually win an election, we would lose our minds. We would say that's the craziest thing ever.
I think it's important to remember we're talking about two different things here. One, we're having a broader conversation of is the Electoral College good or not, or is this national compact that the Virginia House of Delegates just passed is a good idea.
Which is a way of keeping the Electoral College in place, but conforming it to the popular vote.
I think these are two very different conversations, right? I think reforming or perhaps even doing away with the Electoral College has certain pros and cons. This idea that was just, again, it's been passed by several states,
including Michigan's House.
Back before there was electricity, yes. But here's the problem with the existing with that recently passed Virginia thing. Basically, it's telling Virginia voters, listen, your vote really doesn't matter. Just sit back in your lawn chair, have a beer, hand it over to the rest of the country, because at the end of the day, if you vote 60% for candidate X and the rest of the country votes 60% for candidate Y, we're going to award your electoral votes to candidate Y, even though your state voted the other way. And I just think that is a terrible way. I think that is a terrible way to enhance electoral participation and buy into our civic society.
I would disagree with that.
Cases that have come up.
There are Supreme Court cases on that right now.
Because you got that 40% whose vote won't count at all, doesn't count at all in the Electoral College system. Their vote doesn't get added to the votes in other states who went for their candidate. It just disappears. I think this makes every vote count, and it does encourage. I think it will encourage greater participation in those states where the winner is assumed.
Well, to Sandy's point then, is it better to just do away with the Electoral College or keep it in place and kind of create a faux...
That takes a constitutional amendment,
yes,
which
yes.
would be extraordinarily
but again, we've done this
difficult.
before. I mean, remember, in the original Constitution, there was no direct election of the U.S. Senate. And very similar impulses were behind that, this idea of trying to leaven some of the differences among states, of the fear of majorities and their tyrannical instincts, that kind of thing. But it became outdated, and we said, we're not going to do this anymore.
Well, they wrote the Constitution before there was California.
Right, well, that's also...
I got to get to a break, but as we go to break, take to heart what Ben said. I get goosebumps when you say it because you've said it before. The vote that the American voter holds is the most powerful thing in electoral politics anywhere in the world. Thank you all very much for being here. We come back with more on the overtaxation of Detroit residents. This is 5 Local 4.